President Obama and Secretary Clinton created a vacuum. The way they got out of Iraq, the way they got out was a disaster, and ISIS was formed. But they wouldn't have even been formed if they left some troops behind.
The only way that American troops could have stayed in Iraq is to get an agreement from the then Iraqi government that would have protected our troops, and the Iraqi government would not give that.
There was an opportunity, I do think, if we pursued it aggressively, to keep forces there, perhaps to do it without a status forces agreement. The irony is that we have what is now approaching 6,000 troops in Iraq on the ground without a status of forces agreement. So perhaps we could have taken that risk and done that. Unfortunately, when our forces pulled out, not only did we lose the visibility, we also were no longer able to enable our Iraqi Special Operations Force counterparts in particular to keep the Islamic State flat on their face.
But you don't think there was some element of President Obama saying, well, the Iraqis, they didn't want us?
Well, I don't know what his thinking was, but I know that the only chance we would have had for an agreement would have been his intensive involvement personally with Maliki, and that didn't happen.
Former Defense Secretary Bob Gates in an interview with General David Petraeus today, part of an hour special we're working on about the U.S. military. This as an increase of U.S. troops announced today. There have been a number of them in recent months, and you can look back to June 2014 and the increase of American troops on the ground. This is after the withdrawal that obviously happened after the status of forces agreement the administration said couldn't be reached. We're back with the panel. Charles.
It's not as if Americans would have been on the ground fighting hand-to-hand with ISIS, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It's that our presence there had been able to stabilize the political situation. In Mosul, for example, we were the only honest broker that the Arabs, the Sunnis, and the Shiites, the government as well, and the Kurds could trust, and we kept the peace. When we were involved with Petraeus in the surge, the Maliki government went to war with the radical Shiites on his side and took them down. And we took down the Sunni extremists, and that's what yielded the stability that Obama talked about himself. When we left, we weren't around. Within days of our leaving, in January of 2012, Maliki went around arresting the leaders of the sort of Arabs, what was called the Arabs, Sunnis who'd been with us. And that led to the beginning of the end of the holding Iraq together. That's what killed it. It's clear that Obama wanted to get out. He wanted to get out in time for re-election. He did. He could have completed, as everybody could see at the time, the status of forces agreement. He didn't want to. That's why it never happened.
Mercedes.
I agree with Charles. I think that with the fact that Obama was so focused on let's withdraw our troops, create this vacuum. I mean, it's no wonder that in 2014 you had the ISIS surprise in Mosul. You had the fact that Iraqi police and the Sunni Arab forces abandoned their post, and now it's recovery time. And it's interesting how the Iraqi prime minister said, look, this is the final increase of numbers that we need for our troops to see if we can recapture Mosul. But we've lost time, civilians have been displaced, and it's been disastrous.
Take a look at the map. These U.S. troops are going to bases around Mosul, and obviously this is working with the Iraqis. Here is General David Petraeus today talking about the operation to retake Mosul and the real challenges ahead.
This will be a tough fight. ISIS is dug in, they have tunnels, they'll have improvised explosives, ambushes, and all the rest of that. But I don't think it's going to be as tough as we would have imagined it, say, 6 months or certainly a year ago. There will be fierce fighting, without question. I wouldn't be surprised actually to see the Islamic State leaders, though, go out the back door, which has actually been historic as well. The real issue here, though, Brett, is that this is not about the fight against the Islamic State, in my view. That's not the principal concern. We will defeat the Islamic State. There's no question about that. The real issue here, though, is the issue of post-Islamic State governance.
Because, George, there's still the Sunni, Shia, Kurdish. It's a hodgepodge of sectarianism.
Yes, when, as
is almost certain to occur. The so-called caliphate is destroyed with all the good that can come from that, because the kind of charisma of ISIS comes from actually controlling territories and having the pretense of statehood. When that's done, the real trouble may begin, because we will have, by definition, created a kind of vacuum where something, we find it repulsive, but where something now is.